Mayor Wheeler finally goes on the record.
We have allowed our proud tradition of progressive protests to be stolen.
NBA players stage maybe one of the most dramatic sports protests ever. And registration opens up for Vancouver distance learning day camps. They run 8 to 5, 10 kids a classroom, and sound exactly like a school, right? What do you know? Here's the story.
What do you know? Well, we hope you know a little bit more after the show tonight. I'm Dan Haggerty. Let's talk about some stuff. Welcome to the story. Lots to talk about tonight. Most of it is coming from your questions and your comments. Like we tell you every night, that's where we get kind of what drives this show, the news you tell us you want to see. We have a lot of ways to communicate back and forth. You can find me on Facebook, Dan Haggerty, KGW. Email us at thestory@kgw.com or use Twitter and the hashtag HeyDan. We like to talk, write you back. We'll talk to you that way. But if you watch us here every night, you know our favorite way to communicate is through your screen. So let's get to it. And I want to get right into the big story tonight because it's all about accountability. And it's a topic that we did actually touch on yesterday with the help of a viewer named David, who asked us to do a better job holding our leaders accountable during one of the tensest and maybe most complex times in Portland's history. We took David's suggestion and reached out to top leaders who represent Portland to see if they'd speak out and answer some of our questions related to the ongoing protests across the city. Congress members Blumenauer and Bonamici, Senators Wyden and Merkley, and Governor Brown. Now, Congresswoman Bonamici was the only person who invited us to actually meet in person. She's going to be visiting a school tomorrow in Beaverton and suggested that she'd answer some protest-related questions there. So we're going to try and be there and talk to her. The others, well, they kind of directed us to old remarks. They fired off statements, or they didn't respond at all. And we thought we'd do something interesting. It's some tech stuff. We have to walk over here. Come with me. It's on the other side of the newsroom. This is a little tech thing. Here's another camera. Here we go. Come on. Come on. These are all robots. They rarely listen to me. But here we go. Haven't talked. Now, we just mentioned Bonamici. She is going to talk tomorrow. So invited us, but we got to go to her. Blumenauer, no. Wyden, no talkie. Merkley, not yet. Brown, no. Now look, statements, we've seen statements, and they've sent out things on Twitter, but you can't really ask a question, not a personal question to get a personal answer, even on Twitter, I don't think, not like you can in person. So that's what we want. And in that vein, we now can take Mayor Wheeler from the leaders who haven't talked to the leaders who have talked. Because Mayor Wheeler has given us some time. After 5 days following those dueling protests in downtown Portland with no police intervention, I'll remind you, the mayor finally gave the media some of his time. He's still talking actually right now. This started at 5 o'clock. Pat Doris has been listening in, asking questions, was able to ask some questions about the ongoing protests. Pat, correct me if I'm wrong here. We were listening into some of it. The mayor seems to think we can come together in some type of kumbaya moment. Is that right?
Well, yes, he probably wouldn't use that word, but I think he is using tonight as a chance to try and reset, to say that he's made some mistakes, but now he's going to be laser focused on both ending the violence of the protests and helping the business community downtown. Here's part of what he had to say.
Many of the residents of our city, our mostly white city, have exercised their free speech rights to peacefully protest structural racism in a way that makes me proud to be a Portlander. But these crises have also created an opening for violent extremists to do harm to our city, to scare our core downtown employers late at night, to wreak havoc in an effort to drain city resources, not in an effort to reinvest them. Rising up to decry structural racism is a noble cause. Pulling people from their vehicles and beating them in the streets is a horrific, violent crime.
The mayor is calling on all the residents of Portland to rise up as well and to denounce the violence, denounce the destruction from these violent protests. And by the way, just to clarify, he doesn't want, grandmas and grandpas to go out and stand in front of the public buildings, but he wants people to start talking about this. Here's part of what he had to say on that topic.
When I say rise up, I'm saying let's virtually link arms. Let's come back together as a community. Let's defy the division that we're seeing nationally and say, look, Portland can do better. We have a leadership role to play. We can do some great things here, but we also have to acknowledge we've screwed some things up. As the mayor of the city, I take personal responsibility for not being here earlier, not working more closely with the community, not finding ways to address these important issues. But going forward, each and every day, I'm going to do my part to lead, and I'm asking the community, everyone in the community, to join me and help me, work with me to solve these problems facing all of us collectively.
As far as his plans for the business community downtown, the mayor said he's meeting tomorrow with some of those leaders. But I got to tell you, behind the scenes, I've talked with some of those business leaders. They've been very unhappy. The mayor made some promises a couple of weeks ago. They say he has not followed through. He's talking about some cosmetic changes going forward, and I don't know that they're going to be all that impressed. We'll have to wait and see on that. He also did talk about that protest last weekend that had members of the right and the left coming together without police intervention. Here's what he had to say when he was pressed on that.
My point about having more real-time accountability is the way this works is a complaint will go to IPR and I will get no more feedback as the police commissioner because I am part of the due process. And I won't hear anything more on that case until it goes through the IPR process and the internal police review process. And it could be months or longer before I have any information that I can then share with the public. And that just doesn't sit well with me because the images themselves raise incredible questions about whether or not we are being effective, whether we are making arrests on a timely basis, whether I and other members of the city council are providing the police bureau the resources they need to make those arrests.
And so, Dan, I thought you'd appreciate the way the mayor got right up to the edge of saying ridiculous and then backed off and said horrific and other things like that. But it is interesting. He's clearly, after 90 days after George Floyd's death, he's trying to do something to get the city back on track and to find a way to end the violent protests, which so far has eluded him. Dan?
You know, not to be critical, but I do have a question. So, again, I'm just curious. But did he mention anything as to why he waited 5 days following what was getting a lot of attention with those dueling protests and no police intervention? After all, he is the police commissioner, and it's now nearly a week, and we haven't heard anything from him until now. Did he talk about that?
Not directly, although he did say that he has been trying to do too much and that he's been trying to do it on his own. You know, if you think back 90 days, when this all started, he was having news conferences every single morning after the protests to talk about what was going right and what was going wrong. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's just gotten weary over 3 months, like, you know, so many of the protesters and so many of the police and so many of the community. He may have been trying to figure out what he was going to do. I know that he did meet with the police chief, and he said today that he was given the same explanation the rest of us were, that there were just not enough resources. So I think that he's, you know, sometimes when you don't have a good answer to some of the questions, you're not real eager to get out there and explain that to the world. So I think that was part of it. There's probably a lot of different things going on, but he has promised he's going to be much more out in front moving forward, and I think we're all looking forward to that.
Yeah, for sure. Makes sense. Pat Dorris, thank you so much for the report. Now, look, we don't get nearly enough good news in the fight against COVID-19. That's just been the nature of things, right? But we did today. A new study right here in Portland found out that people who work in hospitals face pretty low exposure rates. Keely Chalmers explains why that's good news for the rest of us, too.
Remember way back in April when we were just getting used to life in a pandemic, wearing masks and social distancing? While we were still wondering how those changes were helping slow the virus, researchers at Providence were working to find out by conducting one of the earliest studies on COVID-19 antibodies.
We wanted to look at exposure rates by testing for antibodies in the blood of healthcare workers across the state of Oregon.
On the first day of testing, hundreds of healthcare workers lined up socially distanced to take part in the study. What started with hundreds soon turned to thousands.
We ended up testing over 10,000 people.
After months of testing, the results came back, and the news was encouraging.
There wasn't a lot of silent exposure out there that we could detect.
A total of 10,019 Providence, Oregon caregivers from 8 different hospitals took the antibody test. The study found 253 of them, about 2.5% of participants, all asymptomatic, tested positive for the antibodies. That meant they had been exposed to COVID-19, although it did not necessarily mean they had the virus. The results reassured the researchers that all that mask wearing and social distancing we were practicing was working.
This overlapped with the time when the social distancing and the serious prevention measures were being put into place in Oregon, and it was reassuring to see about a few weeks later that seemed to be working. People were being well protected.
There was a lot of uncertainty in that period, and we felt they were very reassuring and probably giving us good insight into the proper way to minimize the pandemic.
Insight that will help not only keep caregivers safe, but also those seeking their care. In Portland, Keely Chalmers, KGW News.
So I want to tell you, when we first kind of started putting this show together this morning, we have our editorial meetings. We were saying, hey, we should go down into the KGW vault and find some video from 1977 when the Blazers won their first and only NBA championship. The idea was to, kind of lift the spirits of Rip City, because it's going to be a tough one to try and beat the Lakers in these must-win situations now. But that was before the Milwaukee Bucks boycotted their game tonight in protest of Sunday's police shooting of Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man who is now paralyzed from the waist down after Kenosha, Washington police shot him 7 times in the back. The Bucks boycott led to the Blazers and Lakers also to boycott, which led the NBA to postponing all 3 scheduled games today. I mean, talk about a protest. And now it is a protest the Timbers are joining. About half an hour ago, they announced that they will not play tonight at 7:30 against San Jose, adding racial injustice and police brutality towards black people in our community must end now. Now, 4 years ago, to the day, Colin Kaepernick knelt for the national anthem for the first time as an NFL player. The 49ers were getting ready to play Green Bay, and now we are seeing another team from Wisconsin continue and elevate Kaepernick's protest against police violence against black men and women. When they say history repeats itself, man, they're not lying. And I know what you're thinking, right? A lot of people say this. I hear it all the time. Sports, protests, politics, they just shouldn't mix. Well, I have some news for you, and we've said it before on this show. They have pretty much always mixed. And we've seen sports boycotts before, lots of them. Once in the NBA back in 1961, when black Celtics players sat out of an exhibition game after they were refused service in a restaurant because of the color of their skin. Here's some other major ones. 25 African countries boycotted the 1976 Montreal Olympics over South African apartheid. In 1980, the U.S. led 66 countries in a boycott of the Moscow Olympics over the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Then, 4 years later, the Soviets and most of the Eastern Bloc countries boycotted the Los Angeles Olympics in retaliation. And there's some non-Olympic examples, of course, too, like 79 players boycotting Wimbledon in 1973 to support a player who was suspended, and Australia's boycott of the 1938 FIFA World Cup after being annexed by Nazi Germany. And here's some examples not involving boycotts. At the 1936 Berlin Olympics, Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals right in front of Adolf Hitler. That was talked about worldwide. And then there was the Black Power salute on the medal stand from Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 Olympics. And then, of course, the one I just mentioned, Colin Kaepernick, kneeling down during the national anthem. That led to national attention and allegations that the NFL pushed Kaepernick out of the league. Years ago, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell said that he wished that he had listened to him earlier about his reasons for protesting. And we have local examples. Last year, Major League Soccer banned fans from holding political signs, including the anti-fascist Iron Front flag that's regularly seen flying at Timbers games. But after a huge outcry and protests from the Timbers Army, the MLS reversed its ban on the symbol. Earlier this year, we saw it in NASCAR. They banned the Confederate flags from the races, and people were mad. They protested with flags outside of the Geico 500 in Alabama, and someone flew a Confederate flag over the place saying, "Defund NASCAR." Right over the track. Look, the point is, if you haven't already got the point, I could barely get through the whole thing. Sports have long been a way for people to make their voices heard. we're going to leave you with this from Doc Rivers, the head coach of the LA Clippers. The story continues next.
We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. We're the ones that we're denied to live in certain communities. We've been hung, we've been shot, and all you do is keep hearing about fear. It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country and this country does not love us back. And it's really so sad. Like, I should just be a coach. And it's so often reminded of my color. You know, it's just really sad. We got to do better.
Hey, welcome back. So, we analyze the people who watch the show. At least, we take a look at who's clicking on different stuff, who's watching us on TV. And something that I learned about this show is that we actually have a whole lot of viewers that don't watch us right at 6 o'clock on KGW, which I don't think is that surprising. People's viewing habits have changed a lot. Everything's pretty much on demand. And that is why our show always ends up on the KGW YouTube channel, where you can catch it, watch it anytime you'd like, commercial-free, whenever you want. So head there now. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And also, while you're online, maybe just send us an email or a comment or a question, something like that. You can send it to thestory@kgw.com. We like to read those, especially like these ones, emails like the ones I got from James. He wrote, "Your interview with the PSU police chief was well done. You're good as an interviewer. As an anchor, you're a bit of a goof." Thanks. That's fair, actually. I'm glad you got to watch that, James. If you missed yesterday, anybody else at home, I was able to talk with Chief Willie Halliburton. He's the chief of campus public safety at PSU. Think of him kind of as the campus police chief there. He took the job shortly after George Floyd's murder in Minnesota. And a few weeks later, Halliburton decided to do something that's gotten a lot of attention, to disarm the police force. So this fall, PSU campus, the police there won't carry guns. It's a move that Halliburton admitted was not popular with a lot of people, but he has, on the other hand, gotten some calls from new possible recruits and also some other schools around the country who kind of want to hear about what he's doing and some of his ideas. So I wanted to share a little bit more of my conversation with the chief, let you get to know him better, including how his previous job as a stand-up comedian, if you can believe it, actually helps him in his current role.
It's community building. I love being out there in the street and someone comes up, "Hey, Sergeant Willie," at the time, "I saw your show last week at Harvey's Comedy Club. Great show." Or people say, "Hey, that's the comic cop out there." It humanizes the police department. It humanizes the individual officers. So that was part of my reasoning for the entertainment part of my life, because it gives people a different glance of who we are and what we are, that we're just not police officers. We have different interests. We have families. We're coaches. It's a whole lot of different aspects of us in this uniform. I just wanted to give people that glimpse of it.
Were you funny growing up?
Were
you like a funny guy? Were you like class clown and stuff?
No, I was more responsible. I was the one who was always thought things out, and do the right thing at all times.
He really is. He's an interesting guy. I mean, there's no other way to put it. He has a great life story. You can watch my entire conversation with him, and we talked for a while. We talked a lot about his decision to disarm his police. You can find it on the KGW YouTube channel. Again, while you're there, consider subscribing. We got all kind of stuff for you to watch. We upload stuff every single day. So speaking of changes at schools, Columbia River High School in Vancouver is likely going to change their chieftain mascot. Local tribes say it's racist, offensive, and can be used as a slur. Now, this is something that we've seen happen a lot over the past decade, but even more so recently.
Changing controversial school mascots has been a big conversation for years, but how did we get here? Back in 2012, the Oregon State Board of Education banned schools from using Native American names or imagery. At the time, 15 high schools in the state used Native American mascots. So the board gave them 5 years to change them, or else they could lose public funding. The same year, the Washington State Board of Education also addressed the mascot issue, but they didn't go as far as Oregon with the ban. Instead, they urged school districts not to use Native American names or imagery. In 2014, Oregon loosened its regulations a bit, passing a bill allowing schools to work with tribes on names and mascots that they want to use. Now, these controversies haven't always involved Native Americans. Practicing Quakers in the Portland area pushed to change Franklin High School's Quaker mascot. That change happened last year. This year, following the death of George Floyd, and a national conversation about racial justice, we've seen even more changes. Portland Public Schools announced that Wilson High School, named after President Woodrow Wilson, a segregationist, will be renamed next year. And the annual football game between the University of Oregon and Oregon State will no longer be called the Civil War. And that's how we got here.
It really is hard to believe that the school year is like upon us, basically. And I know this school year is going to look a lot different for everyone, regardless of the name that's on your school, especially considering that you're probably not really going to step foot inside the building or ever see a mascot dancing on the sidelines. And stuff like that has kids and parents really stressed out. I mean, some families still right now have no plan. They don't know what they're going to do or how they're going to pull this off. I mean, how can they work and be a teacher's aide to their third grader learning from the living room? But there are options popping up, like distance learning day camps. Vancouver Parks and Rec sent us a press release explaining this whole thing. It starts September 8th. Wait until you hear the details. You're going to love it. See, parents can drop off their kids 1st through 5th grade, and staff there helps them with whatever distance learning tasks they have to do. And this is all day. I mean, the camps run from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. On the release, it says 10 kids per classroom. Everyone's going to wear a mask. They have 2 locations lined up right now, but parents are so keen to sign up for this that they might actually open up 2 more sites. Not 1, 2. That's how excited people are. Now, I read this story last night on the news at 11 o'clock, and I thought to myself, 10 kids in a classroom. They have cubbies for their supplies. There will be adults there to supervise and help them with their work. There's some activities inside and outside. It lasts from 8 until 5. This is a school. Am I wrong? It's a school in day camp clothing. Now, don't get confused. I'm all for it, all right? Go for it. Do what you want to do. I hear from parents all the time that they want their kids to see other kids, that development is so important. Parents also need time to work without worrying about their kids, and these camps are following all the safety guidelines. The classrooms are small. They do daily health screenings. They hired a bigger cleaning staff, but it also costs money. And not everybody has money. Remember, this day camp has seen so much support right now that they're already planning on opening more branches. Lots of families want this. They want something that resembles normalcy and is still safe. But to me, it does kind of feel like a loophole, right? I mean, it's not a school, it's a day camp where your kids do classwork and socialize, and it's a school. And our leaders seem okay with that. Now, I'm not endorsing it. I'm also not attacking it. I can't speak for your family. I would never do that, or what you want to do with your family members. But I will say this. If it's okay for those of us with enough money to take advantage of it, it should be available for those of us who don't. All right, we're going to read some comments right after the break. Use the hashtag #HeyDan. Hit me up on Facebook or email the story at kgw.com. We're going to finish this thing next. All right, hey, let's talk about some of the comments here. Jacob Blake writing in, somebody wrote in and said that Jacob Blake was shot in Kenosha, Wisconsin, not Washington. As you could hear from me even starting this comment, sometimes I misspeak. So if I said Washington, I don't recall doing that, but yeah, I misspoke. It is Wisconsin, after all. Somebody else wrote in and said, as we were talking about the leagues that are boycotting, as you see the NBA boycotting and now the Timbers boycotting after the shooting and paralyzation of Jacob Blake, I forgot to mention also the WNBA. Somebody wrote in and reminded me of that, so keep that in mind as well. What else do we got here? I want to end with one that I got from Karen J. And typically I write in, people write in and they say things that aren't that nice about me. And people seem, for some reason, to like that. But here's one that I like. Hey, Dan, you look so handsome in your suit this evening. Karen. That's the story for tonight. Got me all flustered. I'll see you tomorrow.